Wes.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. The first item is a proposal to review the Route 9 corridor traffic information. And I know Mark Gillen, our trustee, who's actually out of town this week, has worked on this a lot, but Larry, you met with him and discussed this proposal, I believe.
And it came out of the bridge authorities, not just our Route 9 corridor.
No, it's
the whole, right.
Reviewing all the data.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, just in a nutshell, this is not, won't make it long for what amounts to a $5,000 project, but basically the recommendation is to have a traffic engineer, traffic consultant, provide us with an analysis of the traffic information that's contained in the Route 9 corridor study report, and also pulling in other traffic information related to recent projects along Broadway, like Brightview and Continuum and College, the townhome development as well on the same site where Continuum was. So, and really the purpose of it is to get to the point where the board has enough information to make a decision on whether you're supportive of what's contained in the Route 9 study or not. I think it's pretty obvious that at some point this board and the other communities will be asked to be supportive of what's in the study. You probably have your own feelings about it as to whether it could work or not work, whether narrowing down Broadway from 4 lanes to 3 lanes would be something that's workable in this community that could provide us with some additional real estate to provide either pedestrian or bike facilities or whatever's decided upon. But there is some concern that narrowing from 4 lanes to 3 would cause significant traffic issues. And so we are asking through this proposal that be looked at and that a report in layman's terms be provided back to you so you understand it and we don't just dismiss it out of hand. So
right, don't make a decision based on the bike that we were stuck behind, you know.
Exactly. And again, this is not necessarily about pedestrian. This is really recognizing that you really can't provide for any other mode of transportation in the Broadway corridor if the full width of the pavement is jammed with 4 lanes of traffic. There's just no opportunity to put a sidewalk on the east side of Broadway in any meaningful stretch. So that's all this is. That's where that came from, and you know, we'll
It's definitely a question we've struggled with every time we discuss anything up there. That,
yeah.
Or if you go there and try to make your way across and up and over and realize how hard it is.
Yep. And I think the other side of the coin is somewhat is that, you know, we see how horrible the traffic is.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
so
I know,
we want to,
Yeah.
but we need data to actually support the kind of, the anecdotal evidence that we
Well,
have. So.
Right, and also we're interested to see if there's ways of mitigating the problem to an extent that it doesn't. I don't know.
What it might be.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ways to do it. We could take, 100 yards on one side and do whatever we want. But, it's,
yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, a professional perspective on the whole thing.
Yep.
Self-driving 5G network.
So anyway, so with that, we'll move forward on having this. This is only a work session, of course. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on board with this, and we'll go forward at a future meeting to approve this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know I don't want to spend any more time on this, but just remind me who all agreed to, who collaborated on the study for Route 9? Was it from Tarrytown to
Sleepy Hollow to Hastings.
Sleepy Hollow to Hastings?
5 communities, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was, let me just get this. you know, so,
Right.
and, but the 5 communities collaborated.
So the next item is a review of draft zoning for North Broadway.
There we go.
So everyone should have received the draft,
Oh, and you're gonna walk us through the edits.
and I'm gonna walk through the edits, right? So up on the screen right now is a summary of the main edits. So the first one is, there were a lot of questions at the last meeting about hotel and whether what was a boutique hotel. So it's been updated to include a definition of boutique hotel. And that is a small luxury hotel, not less than 10 and not more than 100 rooms, offering enhanced level of services, unique accommodations.
In the,
That's in the definition section,
Oh,
on the
okay,
top of
okay.
page 1.
got it.
In the next section, and also in the definition section, we previously had a definition of office, and that was removed because it was inconsistent with some other uses of the word office in the code. In the next section, there's a new name proposed, so the North Broadway Mixed Use District, with the abbreviation of MBMD, which doesn't sound like new. And I think it makes more sense than some of the other ones we previously considered, so.
Can I make some comments? Am I allowed to, or is this just for you guys?
It's just you're the only one from your board who shut up.
Did you say showed up or shut up?
I'm not sure. But wait, why don't we maybe get? Yeah.
I updated a number of the terms in the document, including like, changing single family to one family for consistency with the code. And then one of the larger changes was we previously had a setback of 125 feet, and now it's proposed to be 250 feet for 2 stories and up to 300 for 3 stories. That was based on some of the comments from the board members at the last meeting. And lastly, added an affordable housing requirement, which would be 5% of the assisted living units. And just to show you what the that new setback would look like. So originally it was at 125 feet, which was this line right here.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's now proposed to be 250 feet, which is this line here for the 2-story. So one thing I wanted to point out is that by moving it back that far, you're essentially making this lot pre-existing, non-conforming, and would be unbuildable in the future. So that's something that the board needs to consider if you're going to push the setback back that far. On the other lots, it's not as much of an issue.
Is where you have the 2, the current building, you have a number 2 that's just floating there in the middle.
For lot 2.
Oh,
That's a lot number, yeah.
Yeah, in one of the tables in the last presentation, I had assigned a number to each lot, and that's key to the map key. So it's still up online.
It's weird. It's still on. No, it's not. Sorry about that. It's been working great up to now.
Another change we made was, there had been a thing about, traffic,
Oh, yes.
about the traffic, there was a particular number, and we made it, will not result in a significant increase in traffic above present levels and cannot be
What page
mitigated
am I?
on page 6. Put it on to 6.
That's right. Previously, we had assigned a specific number of trips during the peak hour, and now it's more broad to be that it would not create any significant adverse impacts, traffic impacts that could not be mitigated.
No, it's on your computer. Because your computer
Yeah,
is
whatever.
big. I'm not sure why it disconnected.
Yeah, so these numbers that are floating are linked to the table.
And I just meant, is that the building where it is?
Oh. The existing building, the purple outline is the potential footprint under
Right.
the proposed zoning. If you were to add a building to the lot,
Right,
that's the, it could be a slightly, this is assuming it would be up to a 3-story building. So if you went to a, 2-story or 1-story building, it could have a slightly larger footprint. But this is assuming you were to add a 3-story building to the lot. That's the max that you could add on any of these lots.
And 3 now is,
So the issue with 3 and also with 4, which is presumably would be an access point to this larger lot, it's owned by the same people. The issue with 3 is that if you push the setback line to 250 feet or 300, I mean 300 is basically the back property line, so you would essentially zone out any new development on that
but
lot.
there's an existing building
But
there.
there's an existing
Right.
building there that would be allowed to
stay.
stay.
and she reasons in this zoning that they wouldn't want to move it anyway, because they're already, I think, exceed coverage.
They already exceed the coverage and they
or whatever,
already,
so
max out the FAR. So
they can
there's a
do
lot of-
things within the building, they probably wouldn't want to, because if they took the building down, they'd have to start, or even add it onto it, they'd have to meet all the requirements, and they wouldn't be able to, so chances are they would.
And they couldn't do the setbacks, so they couldn't do anything.
Right, so essentially this site's built out as is, so 3 and 4 are essentially built out. Their existing condition is the largest that you would see. This is another diagram. This shows if you were to take down the buildings on the lot, what you could end up with. This purple was based just on the original zoning, draft zoning, but now with the new lime, you wouldn't be able to build anything on. You could still build on lot 4. If you were to take everything down on lot 5, this is the footprint that you could get. Lot 2, so slightly larger than what's there today in terms of footprint.
And the footprint for what size building?
This is
I mean, for
20,
what height building?
this
3
is
stories?
20% lot coverage. This diagram where the lines are is showing if it was up to the 0.25 FAR, so some of these are shown as 2.5-story, 1.5-story buildings. One of the things I'm going to discuss shortly is if we go with the FAR bonus, what that means in terms of how tall the buildings could be. If each of these buildings were allowed to be 3 stories tall, then you could get about a 0.58 FAR on this lot. On some of the other lots, it would be a little smaller because there's more natural resources on those properties, or potential development footprint. Lot 1 is a little flatter than some of the others.
I'm sorry, actually, I don't understand. What do you mean you'd be able to get a .58 FAR?
Right, so I kind of jumped ahead. So let me
Okay.
jump up to that. Okay, so if you were to, and this is a little bit mathy, so I apologize. All right, so the way we're currently proposing to calculate the maximum building footprint, that is based on the net buildable area, which is a concept that's currently in your zoning code. So it's when you take out things like excessive steep slopes, wetlands, and you end up with your net buildable area, which is smaller than your lot area. So the maximum building footprint is calculated based on your net building area. So it would be 20% of a smaller number than the full. FAR is calculated on the full lot size. So in some zoning codes, your FAR and your footprint are calculated based on the full lot area. So your FAR would be more tied to what your building footprint would be. So typically, if you had a zoning that said you could have 20% lot coverage next to a 3-story building, that would be a 0.6 FAR. But in this case, it doesn't work out that way, because if you were to multiply the building footprint by 3, you get a variety of FARs depending on the natural conditions of each site. So the largest FAR would be on lot 1, which is a 0.58. The smallest FAR would be a 0.29, and that's on lot 3, which was one of the smaller lots. So you get quite a range. If you were to say each of those buildings could be 2 stories, you also get a range of FAR, and it ranges to 0.39. That's the range you get there. The proposed FAR currently is 0.25, so it would be, greater than what most of these buildings would allow in terms of, most of these sites would allow to be greater than a 2-story building for most sites. One of the things that we talked about at the last meeting was having a historic resource bonus. So one of the options would be to have that allow the FAR on the site to go up to a 0.35, for example. And what would happen on lot 1 is you would get a building that would be about 61,000 square feet, which is an increase from the 43,000 square feet that would be permitted as 0.25. On the larger sites, such as Abbott House, with a 0.35 FAR, the Abbott House is lot 6, so 257,000 square feet versus the 184,000 square feet that was allowed with the 0.25. So
But the building would, it can't be more than the size of the building that's there.
Right.
So let's say you took the Carafiello lot, that is lot number 2. Lot number 2?
yes.
And the historic buildings on that are quite small. So,
Right, so per the assessor on that site, the total footprint, or the total floor area is now about 36,000 square feet
right,
altogether.
but the 3 buildings are small, so that they probably wouldn't bring you up to 30, wouldn't bring you up to 35, wouldn't bring you up to an FAR of 35. So I think what the provision would be, which was similar to the way we did it for the DiNardo development, was that you could, you didn't have to include the square footage of a building deemed historical, but in no event could it exceed.
Exactly.
And I think this would be the same, but what you're proposing
That's how it
here
is
is
drafted.
right,
Drafted right now, is that
that you would, that the not to exceed would be 35.
Wouldn't be up
What you're
to
suggesting.
necessarily get there.
You might
Wouldn't
not get there.
necessarily get
You
there.
might not get there. You probably would for a couple of the lots. Maybe not for that one.
So are there any other questions on the map?
Got it. Sure. Committed to memory.
Right. So it's quite a bit of a range in numbers. I mean, I think just based on the idea that, of a 2 to 3 story building, we end up in this range here, which is why I thought sort of the average of all these FARs is about a 0.35. And I think adding a 3-story building to these lots seems reasonable. It's consistent with other areas of the town, of the village. So that's why my suggestion is having the cap be at 0.35 FAR. And just to
Yeah, so the 3-story concept is coupled with the increased setbacks
right.
to eliminate the looming issue that we talked about extensively in other discussions, right?
Yeah.
Right, that was the
That's a
intention of
different
that.
part.
Yeah. So there would be, it would be a combination of factors. But essentially what it would allow is, these to all be 3-story buildings. And you could actually get a slightly larger footprint with the bonus, because this is showing a 0.25 FAR with less than 20% lot coverage. So these would be, basically, they'd just be slightly larger boxes, and they would,
Oh, yeah, there's okay,
because this is the addition one.
okay.
I can update this to show it with the larger footprint.
You mean if it was 35% by say
saving the old building.
So let's say Abbott House, where they kept the old building, okay.
Because this one is showing if everything were to come down. So this is how it's currently worded. The FAR associated with the adaptive reuse of any existing building determined by the Architecture Review Board to be of local historic significance shall not be included in the calculation of FAR as prescribed in this section, provided that in no event shall the total FAR of all on-site structures exceed, to be determined, inclusive of the FAR associated with such building of local historic significance.
So Ashley's suggestion is that it be 0.35, recognizing that it's otherwise 0.25. I guess the question is whether people feel comfortable with that, or do you need, what other information do you need?
And just as a little bit more guidance, this is the existing FAR on all of the properties right now. So it's a range, the highest being on the lot 3, which is the small lot, which is probably not developable under the zoning. That's at 0.26.
That's the house.
That's the house, yeah.
Oh,
So lot 1 is 0.12, the former Brightview property is 0.1, Holy Spirit property is 0.07, their other property is 0.06, and then the Abbott House property is 0.14.
Okay, so take me back to kindergarten for a minute. So you've got an area, each of those 1, 2, 3, 4 is a particular area,
Yes.
right? And coverage is how much of the portion of the particular lot can be covered, and FAR accounts for how much up you can build.
Basically, how is the density? So FAR, and it's probably more high school. So, I mean, this is like so FAR is, it's the density. So it's looking at your entire property, and it's the gross floor area divided by the property.
Okay, so it accounts for the building up.
It counts for
So
building up.
so we're assuming you're not just gonna have one story spread out.
Right, so you can have a variety. So this is the example that I had in the
There's a
last.
difference in coverage, it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's two-dimensional.
Exactly. So here's a couple examples of what a 0.25 FAR with a maximum of 20% building coverage could mean
Gotcha.
in various configurations, just to give you a visual.
I knew that, I just lost it for a minute.
So, I'm sorry, I'm thinking ahead to the other slide you were looking at, the one that shows the existing FARs?
Yes.
On the existing properties. Can you
Yeah,
show
oh,
that
yeah.
for a second? Otherwise I'll forget my question. So, so there's the existing FAR, let's take lot number 2, since we're all intimately familiar with it. So, the existing FAR is 0.1, and the revised zoning could go up as high as 0.35,
Right.
which is obviously a very big difference, except for the fact that the floor area of the buildings that are actually considered historic, if the Architectural Review Board were to designate the ones that, there's basically the 3 outbuildings that we've been looking at. That floor area is probably like, 0.05, let's say, or some very small, it's even less than that probably,
Okay.
right? So, but for argument's sake, let's just say it's 0.05. So the bonus on that property would only be up to 0.15.
Yes, it'd be 0.3. You could have FAR 0.3. That was the point I was trying to make before.
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
So the base FAR would be 0.25, and then your bonus would be another 0.05.
Oh, right, okay, gotcha.
Let's say that again, because I got lost the same thing. So,
So, I'm sorry.
I know what this
I
is.
don't know your number.
So on
and
this
then
site,
to add the bonus that we're talking about for the 3 buildings on that particular property, which makes that 0.10 something else. What does it make?
No, it's not making a point.
No,
No,
I
if
messed
it
it up.
was 0.25, if they could build to 0.25, if those buildings amount to 0.05, they could go to 0.3.
Oh, okay.
You get that, Connie.
Yes,
That's the
fine.
point I was
Okay,
making
okay.
before,
Yeah.
and the flip of it,
Okay.
the inverse of it.
So going back, were there any more questions about the FAR before I go to lot numbers?
Go on.
Okay. So the other addition is adding a lot coverage bonus for adaptive reuse of historic buildings. So in addition to the bonus for the FAR, you could get a bonus for your lot coverage.
That's not in the draft.
That's not in the draft that was circulated, this is a new discussion item. So this would be lot coverage shall not exceed 25% of the net buildable site area, except that the lot coverage associated with the adaptive reuse of any historic building determined by the Architecture Review Board to be of local significance shall not be included in the calculation of lot coverage, provided that in no event shall the total lot coverage exceed 35%, inclusive of the lot coverage associated with such building of local historic significance. So same concept in that whatever the footprint of that existing historic building and maybe the driveway or parking area that's immediately surrounding it, serving that building, would be able to be deducted from your lot coverage calculation. So you could essentially get a 10% bonus for that, retention of that structure.
So when you look back at the pictures of the lots, and the one with a historic structure might be, you want to point to a historic structure?
Sure, so like the Abbott House, that would be able to be retained. In this case, the bonus that you would get for that, with a 10% bonus, that probably exceeds the maximum bonus anyway. So they would maximize, they would be capped at 35%.
Oh, okay.
On
This is
another,
the FAR would be capped or the other.
exactly. On lot
Well, on lot two, there's
Two.
the little outbuildings that you can hardly see.
right, so
Yeah.
there's a little outbuilding, there's the one here,
Right. And the two in the
two more
back.
back there. So in those cases, they probably wouldn't get to the cap of the 10% unless the board deemed that building historic.
Maybe the lawn.
Although we're getting there in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
20 years.
Yeah.
And so in lot one,
So in lot one, this building right up in front is probably not considered historic, it's a more modern version. Behind it may be considered historic. So those are the two biggest changes, for the FAR and the lot coverage. I think the other diagrams I have in here are ones that we went over at the last meeting. I just had them in case there were any questions about those. Were there any other specific questions?
Well, we talked about one other possible change,
About,
on page 4, on the spread between building coverage and lot coverage, that right now it's got 20% is building and 25% is lot coverage.
right, so that's, so that was a comment that the board received from one of the property owners, was in 35%. In this concept that I just went over, it would be increasing it to 35% as a historic bonus.
Okay.
But that is something the board could consider instead of having it linked to the historic bonus. it could
Well,
be-
no, it could be, I mean, I think the historic bonus is a good idea, but, I think we need to know whether 5% is enough to, forget about the historic thing,
Okay,
let's say it's not
so increasing
historic.
it from 25% of lot coverage to 30% of lot coverage, and then a 5% historic bonus, for example.
Yeah, because is 5% enough to cover
Your surface
driveways,
parking,
walkways,
yeah.
let's say you had a pool outside or whatever. It seems like kind of a, maybe a little bit of a small number.
I don't know, I have to think about it.
Yeah,
I mean, calculated based on the net buildable site area as opposed to the overall lot coverage, I think there's an argument to increase it because you have a reduced ability to construct just based on that.
But just so I'm clear about it, in this section where it talks about coverage, there's building coverage and lot coverage. So building coverage includes what, and lot coverage includes what?
So building coverage would be all of your structures, so any sheds, the main building, any accessory buildings, gazebos, And then lot coverage would be everything else, so anything that was flat. So your pool, your sidewalks, parking lots, surface parking lots, not structured parking lots.
And we're gonna have to, I thought we had a, oh, you did say
There-
this, some of all principal and accessory buildings on the lot.
Okay.
Because
Oh,
that's
I'm sorry,
different
I
than
didn't-
we
It
otherwise,
is different than other
than
sections
other,
of.
says, uses building in it, and when you considering coverage, building includes driveways and stuff. So, yes, it's counterintuitive, but, so, that's why that language is in there, that, the term lot coverage shall mean the sum of all impervious surfaces on the lot. The term building coverage shall mean the sum of all principal and accessory buildings on the lot. We have to be careful.
Right.
So the question is the differential between 20 and 25% enough
Exactly.
to account for those extra things?
Yeah. I don't know much about that.
that's
So
so-
remembering that they'll be
Right,
flat, there's not gonna be anything you see.
right.
So
So the suggestion is raise it to 30? Was that the suggestion?
The suggestion is to raise it to
Yes.
30 and then have another 5% for the historic bonus. So it'd be up a maximum of 35%.
And then there's adaptive reuse. We haven't made a decision on that, or it's just,
Well,
it's a new proposal, the adaptive reuse.
They're all kind of tied together.
no,
but-
that was in before, that's not really new, we just
Okay.
never had it, we didn't have a number.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Didn't
all right.
have a number, and then,
Right, so what was circulated last week didn't include a number for the FAR because I wanted to have a discussion with the board to see where your thoughts were.
maximum bonus to be discussed with the board. Highlighted.
It was homework.
So, discuss.
Okay, discuss.
Where's Mark?
Where's Mark?
I mean, to me, it's, I honestly,
Board colleagues have a view on it as well, because I don't know if 5% is typical for, walkways and parking at pools, for additional farm.
As what it generally works out to be.
It's not additional FAR, it's
Yeah.
covered.
It's covered.
Coverage.
It would vary. I mean, I don't think you have any,
Standard.
no, because lot sizes all vary, and then the pool sizes vary, the number of sidewalks that you need on particular
Hill
lot.
property,
So when,
you don't need that giant driveway.
yeah, you don't.
Actually, would it be hard to sketch that up?
No, I mean, in terms of, in a site plan.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm guessing on that.
From a site plan level, it would be easy
Just,
to.
yeah, I would think that would be really hard.
Yeah, because I mean,
Let's just
us
jump it
debating
out.
it now is like.
Yes, that's what it
What do
would
you
look
think?
like at 25% and what it would look like at 30.
Yes, we can do that.
And don't worry about the bonus for the historic buildings, just the basic.
Because that would really help to visualize.
So keep that bold and all caps on it.
Is the building height, is it 3 stories or 35 feet? Or is there a cap of 35 feet, which would include 3 stories?
It's 3 stories or 30, up to 35 feet.
So the 3 stories would be up to 35 feet?
Right.
Or can it exceed?
It wouldn't exceed 35 feet, and the height would be calculated the same way it's calculated elsewhere in the code. So any exceptions that are in the code would apply here.
I think that needs to be clear.
Yeah, it's still a 35-foot max. It's just, I guess, smaller heights and stuff. Where they dig in the first floor.
I think it's pretty clear. Says no building shall be greater than 2 stories or 25 feet if it's within 250 or 300 feet. Maximum height greater than 300 feet shall be 3 stories or 35 feet. I think that's how it reads elsewhere in the code.
That is.
Including the chemicals.
Yeah.
We have talked about that online.
And then the other big change, if we want to go over that, is in the end of the draft zoning, the addition of the fair and affordable housing requirements, which are based on what Mary Ann has drafted.
Yeah. We'll be talking about that later, how we got it there. And then I said the income doesn't exceed 60%, maybe it should be 80%, I think we're talking about that. Where are you looking on that? On page 89, but we're talking about the affordable.
Because that doesn't pertain to the zoning.
No, yeah, but there was, we wanted to set aside, so it made sense that it would be in this law, but I think it should be part of the affordable housing discussion.
So those were the main changes to the code, the draft regulations. And I'll prepare those diagrams, I can circulate them.
Thank you.
And did you guys have questions, or Pat, did you still have
Pat,
questions?
do you have another question before?
Well,
It was back at the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'm just coming in here at the end. I mean, I hadn't seen any of this material beforehand. But you talk about a boutique hotel, but hotel and motel is already defined in the code. So how does this, I mean, there seems to me there should be some connection between hotel and motel as defined in the code and this boutique hotel. And a 100-room hotel, I gotta tell you, that doesn't sound like a boutique hotel to me. In New York City, but 100 rooms sounds like a Marriott Courtyard to me. So I don't know, I think it needs to be defined. What are the unique accommodations that could be in the hotel, in this boutique hotel? And that should be defined a little bit better too, is an understanding what we're talking about, what's going to be permitted. Are there going to be conference rooms permitted? You can permit conference rooms, and you can have different type of traffic in there. You're going to have restaurants permitted, spas. I mean, what really is what's in the definition of these unique accommodations? No, that's something I think that you have to consider. 100-room hotel.
The boutique
It's not a
hotel does
boutique
have
hotel.
customary accessory hotel facilities such as a swimming pool, fitness room, business lounge, or breakfast room for exercise use by, exclusive use by hotel guests are
Yeah.
permitted.
I think you also talked about, well, use by the hotel guests are permitted. But how do you regulate that? I mean, do you want to regulate that? I mean, maybe the hotel has a restaurant and it wants to have brunch on Sundays, something like that, and it becomes an attraction. Why do you want to leave that out?
Well, full-service restaurants would also be permitted under the code as a special permit use, so potentially you could seek a special permit for both a boutique hotel and a full-service restaurant. There would be a special permit for each of those uses.
It's just that you're saying breakfast room exclusive use of the hotel guests.
Well, you could,
What?
that's not that unusual. You go down to the breakfast area and you give them your room number, and then they let you get breakfast. You know, it's clearly just for people who are staying in there. They answer your room number. They're not going to collect any money from you. It's for the.
It's going to be put on your
Well,
bill.
it's included in.
I mean, one concern, if you have something like a breakfast room, that is going to be a higher traffic generator than a full-service restaurant because people are coming in and out more quickly. So that would be one reason why you want to have that as a separate use that's purely accessory to the hotel versus a full-service restaurant.
Did you think about age, when you think about acceptable uses, age-targeted housing? I know we talked about assisted living and senior care, but age-targeted is 55 and older. I mean, it's something that's become topical and very necessary.
So
Because it's a different demographic, it's a different age, and I think that you might want to think about.
one of the things that this code does propose is allowing multifamily housing. And what we found in this region is that when you have higher density multifamily housing, that by nature does not attract a large number of school-aged children, whether it's for empty nesters or young professionals. Typically in this region, it's very low, much lower than the Rutgers multipliers have shown.
I don't know, I've seen Scarsdale did a great age target, it's 55 and older, and it's geared towards, it's not senior living, you know, it's really between 55 and 75. I mean, you have this whole demographic that's not being catered to, that just needs to be thought of, so.
Well, would this kind of a model permit something? So it's
It
already-
would be permitted, it would be permitted, because it wouldn't, I mean, age-targeted housing is more of a marketing
Right.
target than so as long as your code allows multifamily townhouse type development,
So
that
you
could
could come
be.
in with a proposal and it would
would fit.
fit under B.
Pre-senior housing.
Right. What I'm looking for. Yeah.
But is the suggestion that that use would get a different density than the multifamily that's proposed currently?
So yeah, if you're not gonna have school.
No, I'm just asking,
Right, you're not gonna have school-age children, you're not using the services. Is it something that,
Well, this was sort of, we're kind of basing this on coverage. We were
Right.
actually focusing on the coverage, because the point of this was to leave open space and leave it set back and everything. So it's sort of the coverage was the tail wagging the dog.
Right,
you
so
know?
that was the approach, was defining the area, the buildable area and the box that could go on to the site that would, you know, preserve views from Broadway, preserve the larger mall.
right,
Not to say that it doesn't end up fulfilling needs.
Yeah.
but
Right.
Obviously, if anybody who develops something wants to make sure there's a need, or they won't do it.
Did you do any street views?
I don't have any street views today.
can you also define what dark sky compliant is? It's a term that's been thrown around a lot, and
So the concern is that when you have lights that project up, you are increasing the amount of light that goes into the atmosphere. It makes it harder to see the stars, just as a practical point from citizens, but it also is not good for the environment and for especially amphibians and other natural resources. So dark sky compliant means that you have full cutoff fixtures, and sometimes you would use shielding in addition to the full cutoff. And when full cutoff, that means that the bulb is completely contained on the top and all sides, and it only has the ability to shoot downwards. Where you have a really sensitive area, you can do additional shielding that you would put behind the fixture, and that would light into something like a parking lot, so that it's not spilling over into adjacent properties or a sensitive area.
is there I don't know what it's called, is there a lume limit? Is there a lume?
Lumen.
There's lumens and there's foot candles. So what's proposed in this draft is a max foot candle level of 5, which is a comfortable level for a residential area and for walking. Some, you know, historically in shopping centers and other high usage areas, they'll be as high as 10 or 15, which can be very bright. If you can read a book, you know,
Right, it's too bright.
It's too bright. So 5 has been sort of the trend of where more communities have been going.
We haven't addressed that in the regular code though, have we?
What?
Okay.
Not yet. We've
Not
talked about it.
But one of the things I was considering on this site is that the properties are all up from Broadway. So you really do want to make sure that so they're not casting glare and light down the hill to Broadway. So that's a benefit of having a lower foot candle level and full cutoff.
I guess the question is what more does the board need to see or know, or whatever, before we could talk for a public hearing on this? Because it would be good to hear from the,
Oh, yeah, we definitely want to hear from the public.
and the property owners.
Property owners, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, do you feel like it's close enough to call for a public hearing?
I think we're in no rush to pass it, so I think it's get public, kind of, comment as early as possible. It's, it doesn't have to be, we think we're all done, maybe.
Yeah, and you could change it, so
Yeah.
let's say let's say you actually use the numbers, .35 for the FAR cap for historic things, and the coverage up to 30% for lot coverage, and you see the pictures, you say, oh, that's too much, you can change your
Yeah.
mind.
No, I think it's great to get this much public input as
Yeah.
early as possible.
Yeah,
And to get it started now, because if there's people thinking of things we haven't thought about or
Yeah.
having real resistance to certain aspects
Yeah,
of this, we
as
should rather know
additional,
sooner.
yeah, maybe one heard from one potential property owner as well.
Right.
We haven't heard from the planning board or either. And
I mean,
But having the comparisons would be really helpful just visually. And also, 100-room hotel, do you have any comparisons with the kind of hotel we're describing here, where it wouldn't necessarily have a full-service restaurant, but breakfast rooms and business facilities? What would that compare to? Are there hotels like that in the area?
I can come up with some examples in the area.
Examples would be helpful.
because I think when I looked up the definition, that was the definition, was up to 100 rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty, I
Yeah.
did some
So it's-
research on
okay,
that.
so it's coming from the
Wide
definition
range.
and
And it really has to do more with the boutique hotels tend to, they might be owned by a chain, but they have a more unique name, they tend to have a theme. It wouldn't just be the typical, Marriott ones.
Let me, and maybe you would agree with what you had before. Originally, Ashley had a definition that also, which you would have gotten from one of the planning books, that also included that they were like higher priced. Yeah, luxury, and wasn't sure we wanted to have that in that kind of language in our policy.
No,
could be kind of down home.
Okay.
Gingham. Curtains.
Okay.
So I didn't bring this trick here, but what I did do is I did pull the diagrams from Brightview, because I know that came up at the last meeting. And so this was the diagram that they presented to you last. And so this line here shows what the 300-foot setback would be and the 250-foot setback would be. I didn't calculate, they didn't provide their lot coverage or FAR on this, but I do believe it exceeds what would be allowed under the code, just based on a visual. And just in terms of setback.
What was their maximum height, I don't remember.
It was 4 stories in the DEIS, and then it looks like it was 3 stories when they came back. Symmetry diagram that they had. And then DEIS,
Right. Which was in
it was about a 0.75 FAR. It was, wow. Yeah, and so
Told you it was big.
it was big. This is their line of sight diagram that they had provided. So on the revised version, they had it 3 stories, and that's about 350-foot setback. And so this red line shows you what the 300-foot setback is, just to give you an idea. So something of this height could be a little bit closer, but it would still be behind like that existing brick building with the white patio or porch that's out there. So to do the diagrams of this level of detail.
I mean, I like taking the all the figures that is presented and start that as use that as our starting point to discuss it.
Yeah.
And have multiple public hearings as well. And, continue the conversation, see what we're missing.
I'm sure this is something. But actually, thank you, this is very, very,
And I-
very helpful.
Not to forget that the comprehensive plan update group, we're building on that.
Right.
So that's where the uses came
And
from.
that's, yeah, the
essentially.
uses were exactly.
Right, so this is,
Pat's not around that one, so we're well represented here.
yeah, so it's not like the public hasn't already seen, but I think I agree, we should, no problem, open the public hearing.
Start right after the Board of Ed vote. People can pay attention to the village again.
Okay,
A little tiny thing on page 6, B, at the end of B, it should be an S at the end of controls. That was the only typo. This article
conflicting
controls.
standards, conflict, this article controls. Oh. Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Oh, no, we already had a lot of conversations. I just wanted to say,
And we should mention, we did receive a
Oh.
bunch of feedback from the contract vendee of one of the pieces of property. That is the only
Yeah, and Ashley and I did go through that, and that's where a couple of, you know, not so much that you're doing it because anybody asked for it, but it triggered a couple of issues like the coverage, one, yeah.
So you'll supply us with a visual of what it would look like?
So what I'll do for the coverage is I'll do a comparative visual in a plan view. So we'll do, you know, we'll gray out what that coverage would mean, 25%.
Well, I'm sorry, I thought we had talked about some street views.
So
I mean, I think that's the sort of thing that would be really helpful.
I can update those diagrams. I was holding off on doing the more 3D diagrams until we've nailed down the FAR, because those are much more time consuming
Sure.
and costly to prepare, so I
Right.
had to reserve the budget on that.
Yeah.
Right, but having them for the public hearing
I think
is
it's important to have them for the public
And now we
hearing.
have kind of a starting point on the
not a
FAR.
moving target.
Right, yeah.
So that means the public hearing would be, what date?
June meeting.
Well, are you at a point where you can call for the public hearing on the 20th and to hold it on June 3rd?
Yeah.
Right?
Does that give you enough time?
But is that enough time? That's,
So the public hearing would be on June 3rd?
would be June 3rd, right, but we need to have,
Which isn't that much
we
time.
need to have the draft law.
Yeah, well, that's,
We
the
can get
draft
Draft law is basically there, yeah.
Right, the draft law is quick.
All right, so that's all we
It's
need.
Just the visuals,
The
yeah.
visuals, it's,
It's only-
actually, that's
it's
much
only-
more than 2 weeks. I know.
It's 2 weeks, and yeah, it's this week and then 2 more weeks, and there's Memorial Day.
Okay,
I'm sure you go to the beach and hang out.
I got my son
You bring the
baseball
laptop?
now.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, there's no beach. Until August.
Except
Yeah.
depending on the infield, there's maybe it's in the beach.
So, no, I think that should be fine, as long as you don't need the diagrams well in advance of that meeting.
no,
No, I don't think so. I think
You
you
can almost reveal them that night, right?
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to vote that night, so.
Well, the zoning before then. if
Yeah.
you
The
can-
zoning I'll have
Stuff, yeah.
updated, I can do
Yeah.
that after this meeting and get it to you by the end of this week. So
Yeah.
it's-
Yeah.
Yeah, because we would attach the zoning to the May 20th agenda, so they can call for the hearing.
Right,
Not that they're going to review it that night in any great detail, but just it'll be there,
yeah, no, I think that.
gets
I think
published,
timing's good.
and the hearing's on the 3rd, right?
And then you would have one other meeting in June that it could be at, no?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's 2 meetings in June.
Before, you know, because summer's always kind of, you know.
Well, yeah, but
That
still,
doesn't mean you can't talk about it.
And we
No,
can
let's-
almost keep it open all summer, you know,
Yeah.
when the meetings are dead, but.
let's see the level of feedback you're getting, just, it
Yeah.
may or may not be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
You know what I
exactly.
mean, it's not an automatic, it's not a de facto moratorium in the summer, let's just see how far we get in June.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And we'll see what the feedback is, we don't have any.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll get you the draft by the end of this week and then we'll have the diagrams.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor? Aye.